Hey everyone, and welcome out to episode 130 of a Nerd Named Mark podcast. It's me, it's Mark, it's October, my favorite time of the year because it's spooky season. Halloween is upon us, and for the fourth year in a row, I am doing Spooky Month, which, for those of you who haven't checked out older podcast episodes or are new to finding the podcast this year, every October, every episode is horror genre themed. It could be video games, comics, books, movies, TV shows. It's just all horror. And today, um, after multiple years, it takes I keep dipping to the well a bit. And I was like, man, what haven't I done an episode of a genre for? And obviously one of my favorites is found footage. That was one of my favorite episodes I've recorded, as well as when I went over all the Final Destination films in the franchise, because you know every single movie dipped into one of my freaking irrational fears. But there's one genre, one type that I've glossed over when talking about certain genres, but I never did it as a whole, and that is clowns. Because one of my favorite films of all time is Killer Clowns from Outer Space. Um, there's a video game coming out. Very excited for that. But yeah, I got my Killer Clowns from Outer Space mug with my coffee. And I was like, I want to talk about clowns. And it's funny because, like, I am not scared of clowns. I never have been, never will be. I always enjoyed a lot of films with clowns. I've always thought clowns were entertaining, even in horror films. Um, Obviously, from a horror genre standpoint, it wasn't until was it John Gacy, that's when clowns started to really be used more in horror. They were obviously here and there, but like, let's face it, after all that stuff went down, that's when we got more um clowns in the horror genre. And you know, I started compiling some notes and some lists of some of my favorites, and some that are just really like insanity for what they are. And I'm gonna start off with my favorite, uh, the 1988 classic Killer Clowns from Outer Space. This was great because it combined two things. The clowns were aliens, and something about, like, I haven't rewatched this recently. I plan on it. I haven't watched it in a while. But it's a horror film, but it just doesn't take itself so seriously. Be in just like in the movie themselves, they're not taking the clowns serious because they're clowns. Clowns are supposed to be jokey and this and that, and that's why I think clowns work from a horror standpoint, is because you assume, oh, these are clowns, they're jokey, balloon animals, all the tropes of a clown, and then they start murdering. But the cool thing about this one is they were turning people into like cotton candy cocoons, and something about that was just great. This film actually didn't do well. It failed. It bombed. But it, just like most horror films, it had a cult following, made a lot of money from like merch, t-shirts, DVD sales. So post theater run, it made money, and it's a staple, honestly. I thought, like, I have friends who haven't seen it, and I was like, you got to see it. This is a film you need to watch because it's great. There's a reason why it's one of my favorites. I don't think there'll ever be a time frame where I don't enjoy this film. And it's one of my most rewatched horror films outside of like the first Poltergeist. And I'm trying to think, what else do I watch like excessively? I do watch It, the newer It, chapter 1 and chapter 2, which I'll be going into obviously with Pennywise the dancing clown. But there's a charm to this, because this is an 80s movie, front to back. Like, it's cheesy, and I'm trying not to spoil it too much because I want people to actually check this film out, even though it's been out for so long. You never know, a lot of people haven't seen it. Like, I have friends who haven't seen it. So yeah, Killer Clowns from Outer Space is easily one of my favorite horror films, one of my favorite clown related horror films. I don't think there is really the 80s were good for clown stuff, because a few of the things, movies on this list are going to be from the 80s. I think now, with the evolution of clowns being in horror, they go more creepy, more stalkerish, and then also a lot of films now have clowns from a horror standpoint have to do with like uh those haunted houses you can go to, like the Halloween houses, which I'll get into as well, because there's some films like that on the list, or like Halloween festivals. So they're not really on their own just the genre of just a clown anymore, or more than one. It's always like, okay, a group of friends go to this cool like Halloween Horror Nights festival, and clowns and other horror type figures are doing the killing. But that's the evolution of it now. Back then it was just, here's a clown here, like Killer Clowns from Outer Space was the first time where it was just clowns, even though they are aliens. Whereas another movie, which I already touched on, Poltergeist, there's a clown in this, but it's a clown doll toy figure. I don't even know what kind of toy it is. It's just, and Spielberg, like, basically, I love Poltergeist so much. So the whole story behind Poltergeist is like Steven Spielberg wrote some stuff in it about the tree outside the window in this clown doll, because he had a fear of clowns and this tree that was outside his house when he was young. And I'm like, that's cool. I like this. And those were the elements of Poltergeist that really struck with me and scared me as a kid, because I didn't hate clowns, but I did hate creepy dolls. Because anytime I had to go to like my grandmother's house, she had creepy dolls, and I would stay there, and like I always thought like these things are gonna like get me. And obviously once I saw Poltergeist as a kid, because I saw Poltergeist when I was like 7 or 8, maybe even 6. I was young, and that did not help any of those situations for a young kid with an active imagination. And there is a scene in Poltergeist where Robbie, the son, he had, I think his name was Robbie. Yeah, I think it was Robbie. There was this clown in his room that was on like a rocking chair in the corner, and he just didn't like it. And Poltergeist, there's a whole bunch of spirits and stuff that have started possessing the house, going after Carol Ann and all this other stuff, his younger sister. But there's a scene where the clown doll gets possessed. And some of the creepiest scenes in this film were with this clown, because there was a scene where the clown disappeared, and obviously the trope, looking under the bed. The clown is there, it grabs him, it drags him in, but like the noise, the sound of the clown, the look on its face, like it had like, remember Fantasia from Disney where it had like that big top wizard hat? It had one of those on with the bell on the end, and like its arms got elongated out and like pulled him in and wrapped its arm coil around his neck and everything else. And just even though it wasn't a major part of the film from a time standpoint, just the little amount that we got from that clown just wrecked me as a kid. And like, even though it didn't give me a fear of clowns, but that scene was so creepy, because I hate dolls, and I do have another episode planned where I'm going over creepy freaking dolls, because I just hate dolls so much. And not from a fear standpoint, just from like, I just hate like creepy looking dolls. The original like Raggedy Ann dolls were creepy, and this clown from Poltergeist was creepy, and Annabelle and stuff like that. So I can't wait to actually talk about that stuff in a future episode. So there's, obviously we mentioned, we talk about Spielberg. We gotta talk about also it. We gotta talk about Stephen King. And there's technically 3 films. There's the original film, which was like a TV miniseries. Then we have Chapter 1 and Chapter 2, which was the remake. So the original It came out in 1990. We had Tim Curry as Pennywise the Dancing Clown. I watched the film as a kid. I love Stephen King. And less of a kid. I was more like 12 or 13. So I wasn't really a kid, because this came out in 1990. I didn't watch it when it came out, because I was like 4. But my favorite thing about this, Tim Curry. I'm a huge Tim Curry fan. And he encapsulated the humor, joking like side of Pennywise, but also with the makeup, the way his mannerisms, body language, and how he would change his tone of voice. He hit us with a lot of good creepy moments as Pennywise. I do enjoy because it was 1990, a lot of practical effects. We weren't relying on CG and everything else, which I will talk about when I get into the remakes. And this was another one where it's like, I don't know how I watched all this stuff when I was so young and didn't like develop some sort of fear of clowns. I don't know how I ignored that. I don't know how that didn't happen. There's a lot of things I watched as a kid that were horror that just didn't. I'm surprised they didn't affect me long term. But the first it as a miniseries, it was good. A lot like an ensemble cast. It had. I watched this recently because I was watching chapter 1 and chapter 2, and I was like, I've watched the Tim Curry one in a while. I'm gonna check that out, and it holds up. It's still really good. It's just tough from a story standpoint because even though it was a mini series turned into a movie, or at least when I watched it, it was like cut up on TV. So I don't know if it was in. I don't think it was in theaters. I think it was just a mini series. And I will get over the differences between the two because this one, they're adults. There's flashbacks. You know, some kid stuff, whereas like chapter 1 and chapter 2, the first full film was them as kids, the second full film was them as adults, which I really liked because we got more story to it, some more accuracies to the book. And then the 80s and 90s Stephen King stuff wasn't really so close to the books. Like a lot of the main elements were there, but they did, kind of not cover everything so much. And I'm trying to think. It was just some of the joking and antagonizing of the main characters in the original. It was I preferred more than the newer ones, just because Tim Curry's delivery and everything else, like the head in the fridge, everything else, or was it a microwave? I think it was a microwave because they were gonna make popcorn. Like all that stuff was just so, like it was him as an actor delivering the lines. It doesn't to take nothing away from Bill Skarsgård because he did great as Pennywise in chapter 1 and chapter 2, which chapter 1 came out in 2017 and chapter 2 came out in 2019. So it's weird that it's already been 5 years since the first chapter came out and 2 years since or 3 years since the second one. That's actually shocking. It doesn't feel like it was that long. The interesting thing about it chapter 1 is like Pennywise was present in this one, but he didn't really get a lot of talking or screen time from a character standpoint. It really focused heavily on the kids, the Losers Club, which was cool. I really like that because that kind of helped more of the character world building, going into what they're scared of and everything else. From a design standpoint, like Skarsgård made such a creepy Pennywise. They succeeded in making Pennywise creepy and scary looking. Whereas when it was Tim Curry, he was your standard clown, like get up and costume, and it was like okay, like very bright colors, this and that. Where Skarsgård, they went with the dingy gray and white. Like his costume looked dirty, his makeup wasn't so bright and pristine and perfect, and I really appreciated like that element of the remake. The first one, it's funny because when I first saw the first one, I was like, this is really good, and I was like, we didn't really get the adults, and I don't do a lot of research ahead of time when films are coming out like that too much, so I didn't know if there was going to be a chapter 2. By the time it was over, I was like, we didn't get them as adults. Are we getting a second film? And then obviously when the cast was announced in 2 years later, we had the sequel, which takes place 27 years later, and then that's when Pennywise is back. I really like this one because this one was darker. This one was grittier. Now he's terrorizing them as adults, and we're still getting the flashbacks to them as kids. And from a clown standpoint, I mean, there's a reason why Pennywise is the most iconic clown from horror films. And it chapter 1 and chapter 2 definitely solidify that for a new generation. I think all three films have their own charm. I I'm hard pressed to say I wouldn't tell someone, hey, just watch it chapter 1 and chapter 2. Don't watch the 1991 with Tim Curry. It's like, no, I'm going to say you should watch the Tim Curry one too. Clowns are creepy, and even though they went more realistic, more dark and gritty with these two films, there's still something about the 90s one that is equally as creepy. I will say, like, having CG and everything else, like, that's, I'm always a fan of practical effects. And that's to take nothing away from visual effects artists and horror, especially in horror, because, you know, if, especially from a horror standpoint, like sci-fi and like fantasy, you can kind of like get away with some stuff. There's some liberties, and you can kind of be like, oh, well, it's a big set piece. Whereas horror, when CG is used, you can tell. So I feel like it gets nitpicked more. And I think the CG in this was good. It definitely, they did really good with the CG and everything else. But like for me personally, I would like to see some more practical effects. But that's just how I am. Like it's not. I'm not gonna take anything away from it. It Chapter 1 and It Chapter 2 are still like some of my favorite more recent horror films. Like I rewatch them a lot. Anytime I was like, oh, you want to watch anything? There's nothing new to watch this time. I was like, all right, let's watch It Chapter 1 and Chapter 2, and then that's what we do. Um, all right, I had to do a quick little cut because my camera died and I forgot it wasn't plugged in. So next up, we talked about it, and I'm gonna I'm gonna tread lightly with this next film because I am gonna be talking about Rob Zombie. And there's technically two films total that I'm gonna be talking about, but because of Rob Zombie's filmography, I plan on doing a whole episode going over his his library and catalog of films that he's directed. The first one I'll just mention, House of a Thousand Corpses. Um, this was all right. Obviously, the main clown that has to do with this is freaking Captain Spaulding, which is the late Sid Haig, phenomenal actor. I loved a lot of stuff he was in, and it's about a bunch of teenagers that get into a house of horrors that's run by him. Uh, this was this was obviously my first introduction to Rob. I think this was actually the first film he made. And one thing I will say I appreciate about Rob Zombie is when he does film, when he does that grindhouse style, like from like the mid to late 70s in his filming, it works. I will say a lot of his films I don't enjoy from just a quality and consistency standpoint and originality, I guess. Like I'm just like, some of the stuff I've seen from him, I'm like, well, I've seen this type of movie before. I've seen this before. This isn't like new to me, and it's not, changing anything. But the main one that I really like is 31. This is my favorite Rob Zombie film. This is one of my favorite more modern horror films. When I say modern, I'm thinking post uh like 2013, 2014, anything after 2014, that's like for me is like modern horror. And so 31 is basically, it's obviously set on Halloween, and just like I mentioned before in the beginning, it's having to do carnivals and stuff like that. This is a bunch of carnival workers are held hostage and forced to participate in a game against sadistic clowns. And I'm like, all right, this works. And obviously this has been this is the trope for clowns in recent years, is it's always a carnival or a house of horrors or something like that. And 31 encapsulates that like perfectly. This is one of my favorite films he's done. I do like Lord of the Salem, but that's for another time when I talk about Rob Zombie films, like all of them. This one, I will say, he definitely put a lot into the gore, practical effects, and violence of it. It has actually, when I was doing my research on the film, I found out this thing was edited multiple times to get it just to be rated R, because it was going to get hit with the NC-17 rating. And I want to see the unrated version of it. I want to see that like full blown unrated version. I wonder if it's available. Actually, I'm gonna have to research that. If it is, let me know because I've only watched it a few times, and I really want to see like this film in its like original intended manner because this is probably one of the most violent and like just brutal films he's done. And there were some, murder scenes in Halloween and how in House of a Thousand Corpses that I was like, damn, he got away with this. But then 31 comes out and I'm like, oh, okay. I don't think anyone's gonna be able to make something this brutal ever again. Like there probably are from an indie standpoint, but this was just wow. So between this and a House of a Thousand Corpses, like I was like, man, he does a great job showcasing clowns. I will give him credit for that because shit, this was, and it wasn't even like scary or terrifying like a horror film. This was just, it was like torture porn, as it's called. Like, if you are a fan of like Saw and Hostel and stuff like that, this is up your alley. Like, if you like the horror genre where it's just murder, violence, just extreme, just destruction of humans, like this is for you. This is the type of film you probably would really enjoy. If you're looking for more, you know, paced out, like atmospheric horror with the music making it tense, this and that, this is not for you. This is just straightforward, like, okay, violence. Let's go. And yeah, so House of a Thousand Corpses and 31 definitely, two really good horror films that hit the clown subgenre. But my this is probably on everyone's list, and it's also another clown film that came out in 2016, Terrifier. Uh, it's it's cut and dry. Honestly, I'm not gonna read into it. I'm not gonna give you this deep synopsis of the story. It's literally a clown. It's Halloween night, and a clown is stalking two two females, and uh, the main thing of this film is it's the clown is just like the body language, mannerisms, how he acts, this and that. That's what is actually like making it creepy and making it horror, not just what's happening. And it's very easy, you know, and I don't say easy as in executing it or this and that, but like to have a clown film where you could have a clown with some clown jokes and one liners and then have them have the clown chase the victims. No, the clown in Terrifier, like the body language, everything else, it went above and beyond. That's what actually, for me, carried the film, made me enjoy it more because I'm just like, this is fucked. 100%. This is fucked up. And I, yeah, like Terrifier, like that's all I'm saying. Just, yeah, go check that out. Yeah, it's definitely a thing. It happened. All right, so more recently, even though it came out like 3 years ago, I actually just now saw this on Shutter, which I'm doing a Shutter episode finally. I was gonna do one last year, and I didn't like. I was like, man, I have to do full research because I want to go over and just make like a whole video, an episode, just curating my picks for Shutter of must watch, and I'm still fine tuning that because more stuff gets added. But it's a film called Haunt, and now not everything in this is clown related. Some of it is a majority. This is more just on a fun house. This time, friends are partying at a Halloween party at a bar. They find out about this haunted house and they go. And of course, now they're trapped in a funhouse maze and murder. That's really it. And it's one of those things where it's like, okay, this, I can get behind this. Um, and I will say, I mean, I think uh, Eli Roth produced it, was executive producer. His name was attached to the project. So once I see the Eli Roth name attached, I'm like, you know what, this is gonna be good. He's he never lets me down with horror. So while obviously with most Funhouse ones, it's like, oh, everyone thinks it's all fake and this and that, and then the murder happens. This is one of the ones where it's like the whole entire time I was like, man, there wasn't too much depth to the story overall, which I don't need these like Oscar nominated like drama pieces in my horror films. I'm just saying, especially if it's Funhouse and clown related, just give me some good give me some good one liners, give me some good this and that. But this is one of the ones where it's like a majority of the time silent killers. And I'm like, okay, I'm okay with this. The funhouse elements of like the puzzles and everything else really added to it, the nuances of it. That's what made me enjoy this. And from a modern standpoint, this was really good. And funhouse ones, especially like this one, Haunt was really good. There's another one that was found footage style called Hell House LLC. That one was that's a good one. That one I need to rewatch actually. Just because of how good it was. I highly recommend that. There's so many clown films. Like I'm looking at my list and everything else, and I'm just like, man, there's so many. There's a lot to talk about. Then there's a lot that aren't that good. There's a lot of indie ones. Like when you think about it, this genre isn't the oldest subgenre for horror. I mean, it's really started in the 80s, but not that many films with clowns. But in the last like decade, they've been popping up. Like I was looking at release dates and this and that, and like in the last less than 20 years, we've gotten over 60 plus clown related horror films. And I'm like, damn, that's a lot. And then even when I was compiling my list of ones I've seen and I enjoy, I was looking and I was like, I barely scratched the surface of this genre at all. Like there are so freaking many. And but it's one of those genres where it's like there's a mass appeal to it. Like, let's face it, how many people are scared of clowns? A lot of people are. My lady, she isn't scared of clowns, but she doesn't really outside of It Chapter 1 and 2, she doesn't really enjoy clowns from a horror standpoint because they're creepy. Same with like possession stuff and anything like that. And I'm like, I get it, I mean, I don't think clowns is ever going to be the level of a trope or subgenre like zombies are or vampires, but clowns have carved out their own niche in subgenre in horror. And I think outside of like Killer Clowns from Outer Space, which has a cult following, I mean, it is the only real one that's fully gone like mainstream. But I think with the right writing and directing this and that, I think we are long overdue for another like clown films to like kind of get out of the shadows of that cult indie level and go mainstream. It's just done right, it could work. Obviously with most of the the resurgence of serial killer documentaries and docu-series, John Wayne Gacy stuff, that's probably why we're seeing a pop-up of more like indie clown stuff, but like it shied away from that in the 90s and this and that. That's where some of them kind of were like fixated on Gacy's story. And this isn't, I'm not trying to turn the podcast into like a John Wayne Gacy freaking podcast episode, because I don't, I'm not doing true crime or murder documentaries on the podcast. So that's not, if that's what you're looking for with this, like, sorry, you found the wrong podcast. But no. So from the standpoint of clowns, like, I feel like there's room when done right for this to work and have it become a more popular and mainstream subgenre for horror. For years, basically everything's been zombies, vampires, serial killers and this and that. Like, we keep getting like Halloween, and we keep getting like, Nightmare on Elm Street and Friday the 13th. It's always like there is an opportunity, if done right studio, right, like we could get clowns into that conversation with those. I think I'm shocked out because I don't really count it as a franchise, but I'm shocked we haven't gotten a full-fledged like clown that's, you know, on the same franchise level as, you know, Jason from Friday the 13th, or Freddy Krueger from Nightmare on Elm Street, or Michael Myers from Halloween. I'm surprised no one's gone and tried to create that clown that's in that same Mount Rushmore of like the iconic killers from a franchise. And I'm shocked. I'm genuinely shocked that hasn't happened. Because I feel like if done right, it could work, and I think it would work better than most films. Especially with, you know, we know Halloween's ending, no pun intended on the name. So that franchise will probably be tucked away for quite some time. I'm just like, man, we need some clown stuff. Like, really, we do. Like, I would love. And I've always been. I'm not anti reboots and remakes, but man, if we could get Killer Clowns from Outer Space modernized and done now, like that could be the thing. And I'm really shocked it didn't, like, clowns didn't get used more in film and media when everyone was filming those things around Halloween where like people were just like, you know, going out as clowns and standing around and like scaring people. Was that like 3 or 4 years ago? I'm surprised no one tried to like capitalize on that. No, I'm actually generally shocked no one did. And if they did, it was probably an indie film, so it didn't get, you know, blown up and put into like this mainstream, you know, media form. So I like clowns. I really do. I really do. I'm such a big fan of clowns. And now with all this research, I found like a dozen other films I need to check out. So I'm looking forward to following up on this topic next year. Because, yeah, I keep saying I'm going to do a horror podcast, like an actual, like, just a podcast, a separate from this and just horror only. I don't have time for that. I really don't. I wish I did, because that would be very appealing. But yeah, let me know if you're listening or watching. What do you think of the subgenre of clowns for horror? This month, like I said, it's gonna be all horror podcast episodes. I am recording a couple guest podcasts that aren't horror themed. I might sprinkle them in as special episodes between some of the horror ones. I'm not sure, or I may save and release them in November. Just because I do want to keep this all horror themed for the month. Yeah, so I'm so overworked right now. Like my brain is just all over the place. But yeah, I thank you guys for watching or listening. ANNM Our podcast is now available on all podcast listening platforms: Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, Pod Republic. You know the spiel. I always give you the spiel. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts, leave me a review. Helps make the show more discoverable. The more reviews there are, it could be a quick sentence like, "Hey, I really enjoy this podcast." 4 stars or 5 stars, or "Hey, I like what he talks about comics," or "Oh, he's talking about horror stuff. Finally, we've waited all year for this." Little reviews like that help with the discoverability of the podcast on Apple Podcasts. If you're watching on YouTube, hi, I'm Mark. Thanks for watching. If you haven't, hit the subscribe button down below. I think like a dozen or so subscribers away from hitting 800. That is a cool milestone. We already smashed my goal for the year of hitting 750, so that is ridiculous. So I thank everyone who's been checking that out. Comment below. Let me know. Don't even let me know about your favorite clown horror film. Let me know what your favorite horror genre is. That's what I'm curious about, because I'm always intrigued to have like conversations about horror films with people. And I know I don't do a lot of horror content on the YouTube channel, so I know, like, for those of you who are watching this, been like, wait, he's talking about horror stuff? Like, oh, welcome to the channel. I do this I did this last 3 years, and yeah, it's something I'll be doing it again next year too. But with that being said, thank you guys for listening. I thank you guys for watching. This has been episode 130 of our Nerd Name Mark podcast. Happy spooky season. And I will, yeah, that's the end of the episode. Oh shit, my little spiel. My name's Mark, and I'm a nerd. Yeah, man, I fucked that up.